Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are taking a sledgehammer to the very foundations of the modern power system.
A big one.
We're tearing down the architecture of the global electricity market, and we're doing it based on source material that makes a startling claim.
It's a pretty radical claim.
The claim is that the grid, as we know it, isn't just struggling to integrate renewables. It is, and this is a quote, failing by design.
And that's the core finding, really. The mission for this deep dive is to look at a proposed solution, and it is a comprehensive one, a radical one.
Okay.
It's about replacing this failing system with a new digital structure. It's called the Automatic Market Maker, or AMM, and it's coupled with what they call a fair play architecture.
Fair play.
Yeah. It's a real attempt to move beyond just treating power like a simple commodity. Instead, it tries to ground the system in physics, in digital control, and maybe most importantly, in explicit structural fairness.
Okay, let's unpack that core conflict because it sounds absolutely fundamental. For decades now, we've treated electricity markets as if we were trading, oil or grain.
Exactly, a homogeneous commodity.
But the reality is completely different. I mean, you can't really store electricity in bulk. It has to be balanced instantly, second by second. And it travels over a network that is governed by some pretty brutal physical laws.
That's it. That's the whole thing. The source material argues this commodity myth is the root of today's crises. When you ignore physics and when you ignore the wildly different needs of consumers.
Right. A hospital's not a smart water heater.
Not even close. One needs absolute protection, the other can wait an hour. So when you ignore that, you get these predictable systemic failures.
And we are definitely seeing those failures play out all over the world. So what are the main symptoms of this architectural disease?
Well, there are two really big structural crises that the material points to. The first one is what they call the missing money problem.
I've heard that term.
Our current markets, which are designed around marginal cost pricing, often just fail to provide adequate, stable revenue for essential, flexible capacity.
So things like batteries or gas plants that we absolutely need to keep the lights on when the wind isn't blowing.
Precisely. We're failing to incentivize the very assets we need to make the energy transition actually work.
So that's one. What's the other disaster?
The second one is what they call the solvency affordability trap. And this one affects retailers and consumers directly.
The solvency affordability trap. That sounds like a guaranteed no-win situation.
It is. It's a structural trade-off that's baked into the current system. Put simply, if there's no retail price cap, so if retailers can just charge whatever the wholesale market demands during a price spike,
prices go through the roof.
They soar, and essential consumption becomes unaffordable for, huge parts of the population. But if you do cap the prices for consumers, the retailer then faces insolvency. They can go bankrupt because they still have to buy that wildly expensive power on the wholesale market.
So you either break the consumer or you break the retailer, which explains why we see so much political intervention every time there's a price shock. The market fails, and politicians have to step in.
That is the cycle. The sources argue the market architecture is just stuck in the 20th century. It was designed for a centralized system.
But that's not what we have anymore.
Not at all. The reality is the modern grid isn't a collection of massive, dumb power plants feeding predictable demand. It's this dynamic, complex, weighted graph of interacting agents.
Millions of controllable devices, EVs, solar panels.
It's much closer conceptually to the internet than it is to a classical utility.
That internet comparison feels really important. Today's market design is trying to procure power based on just two dimensions, right? Energy volume and capacity.
Right. Energy and capacity.
Right.
But the reality of high renewables and millions of these controllable devices means there's this critical gaping hole we are missing.
A third axis.
We are missing the ability to successfully value and procure the third axis of modern power. Quality of service, or QoS, flexibility, and reliability.
So the market isn't successfully paying for the ability to move power in time and space.
Yeah.
The flexibility that a battery or, say, a smart fridge provides when it shifts its load.
Exactly. And if we don't value that third axis, we struggle to mobilize all that cheap, instantaneous flexibility that is now sitting inside our homes and businesses.
We just waste it. We treat it as dumb load.
When it could be the very control mechanism that balances the entire grid. And this leads directly to the thesis's central claim, which is that Fairness is not some gentle, optional, ethical add-on.
It's a requirement.
It is a structural, mathematical requirement for stability, for investability, and critically, for the political and consumer durability of the whole system.
That really resonates. I mean, if I, as a consumer, enroll my smart thermostat to help the grid, and then I get hit with some random massive scarcity charge the next day because of a weird price spike,
You're going to pull out.
of course, I'd reject digital control because the system just feels arbitrary and, well, exploitative.
Exactly. You lose trust. And the moment you lose trust, you lose the ability to harness that flexibility at scale. So the architects of this AMM, they didn't just write a mission statement about fairness. They turned it into 4 ironclad operational rules or axioms that govern cost, access, and risk.
So how do they define operational fairness in this high-tech context? It can't just mean everyone pays the same price.
No, it absolutely doesn't mean equality of prices or outcomes. It means the outcomes are predictable, they're proportional, and they're derived from a clear contract that you, the consumer, have agreed to. They define it through 4 core pillars.
Okay, let's start with the behavioral side. If we need people to participate, we have to reward them. So what are the rules around rewards and costs?
The first rule, F1, which is all about that behavioral incentive, is fair rewards. It states that any behavior that supports system reliability, so providing flexibility, relieving congestion, it must be systematically rewarded through lower expected costs.
Simply put, if you help the grid, your bill goes down, predictably.
Predictably. And the flip side of that is accountability. The person who stresses the system should bear that cost, right?
That makes sense.
That brings us to the fourth rule, F4, fair cost sharing. Cost responsibility has to be proportional to the stress or the burden that you impose on the system. So if you consistently create peak stress on your local network, your long-run charges should reflect that. It shouldn't just be smeared across the entire ratepayer base.
So F1 rewards the helpful. F4 holds the stressful accountable. That aligns behavior with system needs. But what happens when the grid is genuinely short on power? Who gets protected and who gets cut off?
That brings us to the other 2 pillars, F2 and F3, which are about protection and access during scarcity. F2 is fair service delivery. This requires that essential consumption, which has to be designated as high priority under a contract, is protected from that unbounded scarcity pricing.
So a home with essential medical equipment, they sign a high-priority contract. They get guaranteed price stability and service. But wait a minute, isn't that just a political solution that hides the true cost? If prices are capped for the vulnerable, where does that cost go? And how do you make sure generators still want to build?
That is the critical question, and it's one current markets completely fail to answer. In the AMM design, the core innovation is that it structurally decouples the signal that incentivizes flexibility from the revenue that pays for long-term capacity.
So the price signal and the investment signal are 2 different things.
Exactly. The aim isn't to hide scarcity. It's to prevent scarcity from causing these catastrophic price shocks that destabilize society and, drive retailers into the ground.
Okay, so you manage the risk, you don't just pretend it's not there. What about the third pillar, fair access? If power is scarce, how do we decide who gets it?
F3 says that the allocation of scarce energy has to be non-arbitrary. It's based on your declared need, your contractual priority, and your contribution to grid stability, not just on who is willing to pay the most or who has the biggest credit line. It actively avoids what they call jackpot allocations.
Those random windfalls.
Yeah, where huge financial rewards or mass amounts of power are just randomly assigned to someone because of a temporary fluke of geography or timing.
What's so fascinating here is that this whole framework just completely transforms what consumption even is. It's no longer a passive volume transaction. It becomes a matter of declared service choice.
That's a great way to put it.
We're moving from the old question, who is willing to pay the highest price right now, to a new question, who has chosen to trade reliability for flexibility or for a reward?
Precisely. It makes all the trade-offs explicit and contractual. And crucially, it gives participants, it gives you, the listener, agency over your own energy relationship. You choose your level of service, and the rules of engagement are crystal clear.
So how do we build the machinery to enforce these rules? That's where the tech comes in, right? The automatic market maker, the AMM. I mean, we've heard of AMMs in crypto and decentralized finance, but what does an AMM for physical electricity even look like?
The AMM fundamentally operates as a continuous event-driven control system for the grid. It's not a static batch auction.
So not a government auctioneer.
No, think more like an ultra-responsive congestion control protocol, like how TCP dynamically manages data flow on the internet. It's constantly sensing bottlenecks and adjusting traffic in milliseconds. The AMM is doing sequential feasibility checks based on the real-time physical state of the grid.
That is a huge shift. Current systems take a snapshot every 5 minutes, clear the market based on static assumptions. The AMM is constantly feeling the pulse of the grid. But how does it handle the massive locational complexity? The voltage stability, line flows, congestion.
It solves that complexity by using a nested, layered pricing structure. Forget the academic term holarchy. Just think of it as nested pricing zones. The AMM calculates prices at the lowest possible level to reflect specific physical constraints.
Give me an analogy.
Imagine dynamic road pricing. Today, we might have one price for a whole city, but the grid is more complex. The AMM would price power differently at the system level than at the zone level, say a whole city, then at the cluster level, which might be your neighborhood, right down to the node level, which is your street.
So if the wire leading to my neighborhood is overheating, the price signal I see actually reflects that local physical problem.
Exactly. Not just some abstract national price.
That makes perfect sense for demand. But we still have to get generators to invest billions. How does the AMM use fairness to compensate them reliably and solve that missing money problem?
Generator fairness is handled with something called Shapley values, which is a concept from cooperative game theory. In short, it's a way to mathematically figure out a generator's marginal contribution to the system's adequacy and pay them for it.
So revenue is split up.
Yeah, total producer revenue is explicitly broken down. You get stable, guaranteed cost recovery for fixed cost generators like nuclear and wind, and then for flexible assets.
The batteries and gas peakers.
For them, a specific scarcity pot is created. They get paid based on their actual system value, how often and how effectively they stepped in to solve grid problems. It's so much more stable than relying on random jackpot price spikes.
I know that Shapley values are usually computationally impossible for something as vast as a national grid. I mean, the standard calculation involves mapping every single possible combination of every power plant in the country.
It's an intractable amount of calculation. You can't do 2 to the power of G calculations, where G is thousands of generators. The technical innovation here is what they call the nested Shapley procedure.
So instead of mapping every house, you map cities, then neighborhoods?
That's the idea. They group generators into clusters that meet specific physical conditions. This maintains the fairness principle, revenue matches contribution, but it reduces the computational complexity from impossible to doable in real time.
That's the engineering breakthrough that makes the whole theory work. So let's get to the proof. We have the theory, we have the architecture. How did the AMM actually perform in simulations against the current design, locational marginal pricing, or LMP?
Well, the contrast is really between chaos and stability.
I'm looking at the price stability data, and it is stark.
It really is. The baseline LMP model, it relies on those occasional extreme scarcity rents, the massive price spikes, to incentivize investment. And this results in price distributions that are all over the map. You get frequent hits to the value of lost load cap, which in the simulation was something absurd like 19,999 thal's per megawatt hour.
That is the definition of systemic instability. How does the AMM stop that?
AMM prices are structurally bounded. Because they decouple that long-term cost recovery from the marginal energy price, they can ensure prices stay within an intelligible envelope for the consumer. In their experiment, they used a tightness cap, a max price of, say, 90 pounds per megawatt hour.
A huge difference.
It's an enormous margin. That structural boundedness just materially reduces system-wide price volatility.
And that immediately addresses the solvency affordability trap. It removes the possibility of those catastrophic price swings. But the real game changer for consumer behavior is F1 Fair rewards in action. What was the specific result on rewarding flexibility?
This is the number that should really shock you. The AMM systematically rewards participation. They measured what happened when they increased device-level flexibility. So the time window a smart device could shift its load from 0 hours up to 6 hours.
Okay.
For those users, the median realized unit cost dropped from £30 per kilowatt hour to just £9 per kilowatt hour.
Wow. Wait, let me just repeat that. That is a 70% reduction. From 30p down to 9p per kilowatt hour, with zero change in the total amount of energy they consumed.
Zero change.
That difference is purely the market rewarding them for contributing 6 hours of flexibility. That's the incentive that drives mass participation.
It's the business case for digital participation right there. And on the supply side, it stabilizes generator investment too. By using those Shapley values, the AMM gets rid of the reliance on jackpot revenues. Instead, generator revenue is aligned with their predictable physical contribution. It makes investing in batteries and gas far more bankable.
So what does this all mean for the future of the grid? This deep dive, it seems to show that the transition to a fair, decarbonized grid requires this profound mindset shift.
Yeah.
We have to stop treating the electricity market like a static rulebook from the 1980s,
And start treating it.
as a critical digital infrastructure product, something that needs to be engineered for fairness and for resilience. This AM Fair Play architecture seems to provide a blueprint for a future where electricity is defined by quality of service, by flexibility, and reliability.
The ultimate systemic claim here is that the market has to be governable as software. Its operational rules, the fairness axioms, they must be testable, versioned, and replayable against real system data. It's about accountability and transparency. It's really the only way we're going to manage the massive complexity that's coming.
And this goes so far beyond just economics and engineering. The source material notes that future digital systems won't just allocate power and resources. They will also allocate, and this is a quote, dignity, resilience, and agency. If the digital market architecture determines who gets power, when, and how, then the very design of these algorithmic allocation rules, that becomes the new frontier of democratic governance and the modern social contract in an electrified world.
A lot to think about.
Something for you to mull over until our next deep dive.
Yeah.